Call Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on the Ngati, Tuwharetoa, Raukawa and Te Arawa River, Iwi Waikato River Bill. It is with great pleasure that I stand to speak in support of this bill. I think it is instructive in understanding the significance of this bill to actually look at the vision and strategy that is to be implemented that is contained within Schedule 1 of this bill. The ACT Party has quite rightly pointed out that it is this vision and strategy that will gain legal force, assuming this bill passes through the House. And I think the rabble-rousing that the ACT Party have engaged in around this vision and strategy shows something of their values. Because when you look at the vision and strategy, they are things that we think as New Zealanders are tremendously important. For example, the strategy says that in order to realise the vision, the following objectives will be pursued. Those objectives include the recognition and avoidance of adverse cumulative effects and potential cumulative effects of activities undertaken both on the Waikato River and within the catchment on the health and well-being of the Waikato River. It is not understood by people who don't follow river ecology closely that what happens in the catchment of the river is much more important actually than what happens in the river itself. That most of the pollution that ends up in the mighty Waikato River is actually a result of the activities within the catchment. More than 3/4 of all the nitrogen that ends up in the river comes from intensive agricultural practices in the catchment of the river. And the vast bulk of these agricultural practices are permitted activities. There is no control over these kinds of activities. So when we say that we want to give power to the co-governance body to implement the vision and strategy, it seems to me that that is a wonderful thing to do, to give power to local tangata whenua to have some say over the activities that are actually resulting in the destruction and the pollution of this river. Because when you look at the contaminants that end up in the Waikato River, it is the nitrogen and the phosphorus are coming directly from intensive agricultural practices. The point source discharges, such as the sewage treatment plants in Hamilton and other places, are actually a very small part of the overall pollution going into the river. And so I would say to the River Iwi, you have an enormous challenge, in fact, ahead of you. And it is absolutely true that the Regional Council has failed in its duty to protect the river, and it has been up to a minority within the Waikato region, both tangata whenua and greenies and environmentalists, to speak up for the river because the river has been polluted over many, many decades. It's also, I think, important to look at other aspects of the vision, the wonderful vision and strategy that is in this document. It says that in order to realise the vision, the following objectives will be pursued, and it talks about the recognition that the Waikato River is degraded and should not be required to absorb further degradation as a result of human activities, the protection and enhancement of significant sites, fisheries, flora and fauna, the recognition that the strategic importance of the Waikato River to New Zealand's social, cultural, environmental and economic well-being requires the restoration and protection of the health and well-being of the Waikato River, the restoration of water quality within the Waikato River so that it is safe for people to swim in and take food from over its entire length. Mr. Speaker, by the time the Waikato River reaches the river mouth, the visibility within the river is less than 1 metre. When it leaves Lake Taupo, the visibility is more than 14 metres. The reason that happens between the top and the bottom is because of the massive contamination that goes into that river system. And overwhelmingly, that contamination comes from intensive agricultural activities from anyone who cares to look at the science on the issue rather than the rhetoric that comes from federated farmers and others who are merely advocating for intensive corporate agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the iwi have a tremendous challenge in being in the co-governance, on the co-governance body trying to implement this vision. And I want to point to one of the real problems that we have, which is that most of the activities that are polluting the river are not activities that require a resource consent. They are permitted activities. Most of the agricultural farming activities that are contributing the vast bulk of the pollution do not require a resource consent. If we want to clean up the Waikato River, we must make intensive agriculture a consentable activity. It is only when we make intensive farming that it requires a consent that we can actually clean up the Waikato River. Now that is something which is actually quite radical in New Zealand at the moment. Because there is a very powerful lobby that says you cannot possibly require intensive agriculture to be a consentable activity. But in fact, if we do not make intensive agriculture an activity that requires a consent that can be controlled so that the nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment and fecal loads that currently go into the Waikato River are reduced, then we will never clean it up. Now, some people say, well, the dairy shed effluent is a consentable activity. In fact, dairy shed effluent is a tiny part of the pollution that's going into the river. The vast bulk of nitrogen ending up in the river system is coming from the field where the cows are grazing. Each cow produces as much faeces and urine as 14 people. We have 1 million cows or more standing on the fields in this catchment, producing the fecal load as if 14 million people were standing in that catchment and doing their business on the ground. That is the equivalent of that intensity of dairy farming within that catchment. And it is that massive fecal, nitrogen, phosphorus and sediment load that is contaminating the Waikato River. So until we make those kinds of intensive agricultural activities that require a consent and can be controlled, we will not clean up the river system. Now that is a tremendous challenge, and nobody in this room can underestimate, of course most people in this room don't even understand this, but nobody in this room should underestimate how great that challenge is, how fantastically huge that challenge is to clean up the Waikato River. We have been fighting an incredible, powerful lobby in New Zealand who do not want to clean up the river. The Greens constantly find ourselves in battle against federated farmers and intensive agricultural industry who do not want to clean up that river system. Now, I think that it is fantastic that we have this vision and strategy for the Waikato River. It is fantastic that we have the river iwi to be involved in some of the decision making and some of the governance around this river system, because the iwi and hapu on this river system are a tremendous ally of this mighty river. They are an ally who will stand up to help clean up the river, and this vision statement is a fantastic statement about what the river system should be like. But my warning, if you like, to the iwi and hapu who are embarking on this journey is that if you cannot get control of the activities that are actually producing the pollution, the intensive agricultural activities that are producing the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the faeces and the sediment ending up in your mighty river, then we will fail in our job to clean up the river. So this is just a start, and it's great that this vision statement is going to go straight into the regional plan, because actually the regional council hasn't done its job properly, and it should have adopted a vision statement like this many decades ago. And thank goodness for the iwi that they have managed to get this vision statement put into the regional plan through this act, so that we have a standard against which to judge the management of the river, and so that we can improve the management of the river. Because it is not only for Māori, it is for Pākehā as well, that their children should be allowed to swim safely in this river, that their children should be able to fish in this river for tuna and for whitebait, because this river system is actually part of our natural heritage. We spend a fortune on all our cultural heritage, which is fair enough, but it is rivers like this that are our living natural heritage. And so the Green Party will be supporting this bill tonight.
The Honourable